Bosse Lagerqvist, professor in Department of Conservation in the University of Gothenburg, Sweden.
Idea of craft firmly established in Sweden. This is written by Christopher Polhem in 1710. And as you could see, it has no high regards of craftspersons. It's really like people without minds doing slavery jobs. It's better to be interested in beautiful books and descriptions that provides a better fundament for what I guess Vasilis meant knowledge. And this is something one could meet up to the 1990s, actually, this attitude. And if it wasn't this attitude, it was an attitude of traditional crafts, okay, interesting museum stuff, but we don't need them today. We are in the modern times. We don't need historical crafts. We're going to buy that. So we come into craft, and often one talks about the knowledge of the hand. And I know that you will say something about the knowledge of the hand, so I'm not criticizing you, but I think it's rubbish. Because if I take an axe and chop the hand off and put it on the table and say, do something, it will not do something. So the hand is relied on the fact that I have a mind, I have an idea, I have knowledge, I have a vision, something guides my hands. Then we could have different abilities of using the hands. We could have 10 thumbs, or we could have all our fingers doing things and knowing how we are doing it and why we're doing it. But if we look at the Oxford English Dictionary from 2015, we still got some support of theory in the way Vasily said. It's a conception or mental scheme of something to be done, or the method of doing it. So we have something that rules how we do things. But also, as you said, Vasilis, it's also contemplation or observation that we look at things. And I will come back to that later. There's also often that theory and practice is kind of a dualistic expression. There are two opposing concepts of how we think and know things. And I think that is a little bit disturbing because they are intertwined. We practice theories. So we need to practice the theory of geometry to create the functioning vault. But we could also theorize practice by analyzing and understanding previous practice. So they are intertwined with each other, and we need to understand that and not make unnecessary conflicts. And that has been one of our big problems when we have brought in craft in the academia. So one way, when we talk about education, and I go back like 20 years, when we had something in Europe called the Bologna process, and some years after that, we had the establishment of European higher education area. We had the objective that within these European countries, there should be free mobility of staff and students. You should be able to go without problems between countries if every university in Europe agreed upon how one looked upon learning outcomes. So Bloom's taxonomy was used to define learning outcomes in 8 levels, going from bottom up this pyramid to the top, where we have more and more advanced active verbs. So all universities around Europe in 2005 and onwards started to revise all our course plans and learning outcomes in order to harmonize what we wanted the students to be able to know and learn and do after courses on a certain level. This is in parallel with something called the European Qualification Framework. The European Qualification Framework was established in 2008, and in principle you could say that craft training, vocational training, often goes under EQF level 5, which means upper secondary, or in the US system, high school, meaning you take your exams when you're 18 or 19 years old. Some countries, like in Sweden, not we, but the municipality organization has the opportunity to establish higher vocational education, which goes to EQF level 6. So EQF level 6 is bachelor's, EQF level 7 is master's, and EQF level 8 is a doctoral degree, a PhD level. So if everyone in the universities all around Europe agreed upon how one organized the training and education according to these levels, then it would be possible to have free mobility of students. So what we wanted to do was to see, but we want to have craft in EQF level 8. We want to see that it is a knowledge area in our subject area equal other knowledge areas what we are working with. So what are we? I will try to give you an image of Department of Conservation at the University of Gothenburg. So from a very simplistic way, we could see that we train students to be professional on an operative level in the heritage practice, on national, regional, local levels, in private practice or in public administration. But they operate everyday problems, working with preserving, restoration, securing, safeguarding, whatever, like all other sectors have an operative level. Sometimes we have a problem that we don't solve with what we have as existing tools, standards, instruments, knowledge. So we have to do something with that problem. We have to raise it. We have to make an abstraction of it to see, okay, is this an example of something new that is happening? Do we need to develop new models? So we raise it to a modeling level where the key word is how are we doing things? Should we change how we are doing things because of this new problem? Sometimes that isn't enough. The problem is not solved by us doing new models. We have to understand this problem from another level. So we raise it to a meta-modeling level, making it more abstract to see, okay, this is not perhaps a problem only for the heritage sector. It could be a problem for the broader societal level, something affecting all of us that is more a question of why should we do this, or why should we perhaps work together with other societal sectors to solve this. We should perhaps have a critical review of what we are doing at large to see, are we doing the right things? Why are we doing what we're doing? So what kind of problems do we have? And from my point of view, we have severe problems today that we could call major challenges, and they are facing the society at large. And these major challenges does not only affect the heritage sector, it affects all societal sectors. It could be, for instance, mass tourism. It's not only heritage sites like Venice or Dubrovnik or Barcelona. We have tourism all over the place. At the same time, it's an opportunity to make money, but it could also be a problem. We have climate change. This is my hometown. Typical day in the autumn, when the river from the left comes from the inland, full of rainwater, meeting the North Sea from the right, westerly winds, and then we have a water collision in my hometown, creating a flooded city core every autumn. So now the community is taking precautions to start to build walls to see if we handle this water in some cases. This is something that has come the last 25 years to an increasing degree. The need for circular economy, I will come back to that at the end. Natural disasters. This is the earthquake in Albania 2019. The photo is from Durrës. And as you could see, some buildings are totally mess, while other buildings stands totally unaffected. How come? Well, this is a typical way of speculative, fast, cheap, and lousy building technology, creating houses to be rented out to tourists for expensive money, but they were lasting just so long. They couldn't stand this earthquake. We have geopolitical conflicts to an increasing degree in our proximity, and we could see now that more and more public funding goes to the defense industry and to increase our ability to defend ourselves. But it also creates, if we go to areas who had this kind of disturbance, in Syria, in different parts of Africa, in Ukraine, in a rebuilding situation, this will be supreme logistical problems requiring severe cooperation over several societal sectors and national boundaries. And we also have disturbing, uncomfortable heritage. This is on the back of the National Museum in Tirana, where a couple of statues standing that are no longer welcome to stand in the public open areas. And we have Black Lives Matters, and we have other movements that create needs for redefined history, which affects, of course, the heritage sector. So what we do in our department is that for the modeling level, we work with what we call conservation science and craft science with the support of cultural historical subjects, natural sciences, and technology. For the meta-modeling level, we work with heritage science with the support of social sciences and humanities. And I use the word sciences even if Vasilis said that we shouldn't do it. But it's the common language within the academic world. So to simplify matters, we call it like that. So this is our area of working, studying, educating, researching, interacting with the society in a subject area we call integrated conservation, where we see us as an inclusive, sustainable societal development, where heritage represents an asset rather than a problem, and is an asset for developing society in a sustainable way. So we define our area as the dynamic management of change in order to reduce the rate of decay. So we don't talk about ancient, we don't talk about preserving, we don't talk about eternity, we don't talk about monuments, we don't talk about that. We talk about the total built environment we have around us that have a number of historical layers, more or less clearly visible and readable. It's like a palimpsest where everything contributes to a situation we have today that will continue to change. And in that change, we need, as heritage professionals, see to that this change at least doesn't increase the decay, but rather the opposite, creates better society in all aspects, not only material-wise, but also in terms of equality and people's rights. We talk about right-based approaches in heritage practices, and that means human rights, going back to the convention from 1949. So this is our theoretical frame, we could say, that is organized in 4 bachelor's programs: integrated conservation of built environments, conservation of cultural objects, building crafts, garden and landscape crafts, and 2 master's programs and a PhD program where we have, in principle, the themes of built environment, objects conservation, and craft. So we are kind of education-heavy department. That is where we have most of our activities, money, staff, focus. But we also do have research in different areas related to that, and we have research in craft. Most of that is channeled through our craft laboratory. So this is how we are doing. So if you look at craft and if you look at all our research areas, so we think that we are working with practice-led research. So practice-led research is something actually, and most of you are architects here, and the research in architecture is also often practice-led. meaning that the practice is the natural arena for research, and the practice methods are the methods for inquiry. So we situate research problems, or we pick up research questions from the practice area. So going back to the image where we train and educate students for being operational, working with the practice, that is our fundament, which is also typical for our practice-led research. An example of how that could be is Ulrich Lassen. This is his PhD work, resulting in his dissertation, The Invisible Tools of a Timber Framer, a survey of principles, situations, and procedures for marking. And what is marking? Well, you could see that what he's doing there is that he's joining timber. And timber is an organic material. It has its own life. It decides by itself if it will be, turned in different ways. But when joining it, the final product should be correct, symmetrical, exact, accurate. So getting an organic material that has its own will to have good joinery, you need to have a marking system. So he had his journey. He went to England, France, Germany, Switzerland, and Japan to learn traditions of how to join timber. And this is his halfway project in his dissertation. This building with 64 different examples of timber joining from different parts of the world put together in a construction. The only way of studying it is to dismantle it. But when he did it, it was filmed all the time. Because when he should defend this as an academic critique, one looked at the film to see how did he do that? Was it correct? Could you do it in another way? Practice-led research, how to do practice-led research is described by Nicola Wood in her dissertation from 2006. And so you plan, you act, observe, reflect. And I'm going to put some emphasis in reflect. It's not only reflecting on how you did something, the act, but it's also reflection on how you have observed what you're doing. So an example of this is Patrick Jarefjell. His dissertation was Forging of Augers, a methodological study from a craft perspective. What is an auger? The auger is what you see there. It's a kind of a drill. It's a drill that has this, the traditional auger. For one rotation, it goes deep. For two rotations, it goes even deeper. Compared to an electric modern drill machine that has a lot of rotations for going to the same depth. But this is a hand tool, so you need something that goes deep, is effective in its drilling. So this is a drill for taking out holes, for log notches where you have some wooden plugs between the logs. So you need to have holes to put these plugs in. So you can see that what he's doing, he's filming in the smithy. So he has 4 cameras, one in each corner, and he has a camera on his head, filming all the time what he's doing. When we had this tour today, I saw a pair of glasses where you have camera in the glasses. So today it's much simpler. Those glasses wasn't there when he made his dissertation work. So he had to have these different cameras. And what you could see here, but in the upper right-hand corner, it's a kind of time geography. So what he says there is that it took 10 seconds to prepare the iron, 10 minutes to do the first part of smithy, another 5 minutes to do the second part of the smithy, another 5 minutes for heat treatment, and the last 10 minutes for finalizing the product. And the idea with his procedures here was to see how fast can I do this? How good craftsperson can I be? Can I increase the speed so that if I should make my living on doing these things, it would be good if I could do 500 a day, because then I could sell 500 a day. So that was part of his research, to see how did I work in the smithy. So we end up with craft science. So craft science is both theoretical and practical. And so if we look at traditional studies of craft, it's resulting in studies that explains how craft has been done. It's knowledge about how craft has been performed. But craft science is also practical because one should be able to perform what one has studied. So it's theoretical and practical. One example is Fredrik Lejonhufvud and his dissertation in the wake of the boat builders, interpretation and reconstruction of the craft tradition in the Stockholm archipelago. This boat building tradition died out roughly a century ago. And Fredrik, I have known Fredrik for 30 years. He trained young people to become boat builders, so he's experienced boat builder. But now he wants to reconstruct a boat building tradition that had died out for like 100 years ago. How should he do that? He used a lot of different theoretical perspectives to not only guide him on how to discuss his results, but also to guide him to what methodological approaches could he work with in trying to find the knowledge for this boat building tradition. So eventually, he could understand and explain how this tradition was performed, and as you see in the bottom right corner, actually building a boat in the tradition. Coming to the craft laboratory, in Sweden we have public bodies, the National Heritage Board, the National Property Board, and the Swedish Church is not longer part of the government, but kind of free association, but they put a lot of public funds on restoration projects. So in the early millennia, they started to have discussions on the fact that the amount of money they were putting on restorations didn't mean that they were able to describe what kind of craft quality they required for the restoration. They were not either able to evaluate the craft quality after the restorations. And this was a kind of troublesome because there were examples of objects that were subjects for this kind of funding too often, indicating that it wasn't good enough in the first place. So in discussions with the National Heritage Board, we set up the craft laboratory together with Swedish Church, National Property Board, craft companies, trade associations, and local and regional authorities. And with the objective to be a kind of knowledge bank and upkeep knowledge of traditional craft skills, but also eventually, as it turned out, see if we could reconstruct the different craft skills and also focus on craft skills that were decreasing and was a problem for the practice area because they couldn't get hold of people who could do things safeguarding the different objects. So that is part of our department, and our department has this problem. We are situated in two places, in Gothenburg on the west coast and Mariestad at Lake Vänern. So it's not easy to be head of department with 200 kilometers between the endpoints, regardless of all digital technologies for communication. So you need to go. So when I was head of department, I was 2 days in Mariestad, 3 days in Gothenburg, and then 2 days in Gothenburg and 3 days in Mariestad.
Like
that. But in Mariestad, we have this, as you could see in the middle upper part of the picture. It's a city from early 1600, well-preserved city core, And it's inspirational to be in that kind of environment. And we have here then office, lecture rooms, library, we have carpentry, we have masonry, we have school garden, and we have timber construction workshops. So we have all these facilities in Mariestad, and the positive thing with this is that compared with Gothenburg, the price per square meter here is nothing. If we should have this in Gothenburg, it would cost us a fortune just for renting the square meter. So that is one reason. Another reason is that in a small community, you have good contacts with the administration and the political leadership, so you could have fast decision lines. But we are not only working in Mariestad, because this is facilities for our educational programs, but also for the craft laboratory. But the craft laboratory is also working across the country, and that is where we have what we call the laboratory methodology. And what is that? Well, we have a professional practice, an object that is subject for a preservation project that gives a physical result that possibly ends in problems and questions. Okay? Nothing happens in the ordinary practice. We go on and we end up in the same problems and practice. So that goes on and on. If we take these problems and questions and put them into the craft laboratory as starting point for defining a research project, where we need a case study, we then go back to the professional practice where they have an ordinary object they should do something with, and we say, okay, this is a case study. We use it for study something. And preservation project runs, it gives a physical result, and possibly we end up in a methods and knowledge development situation that could be brought back to the research, giving new research projects, and also being given back to the practice as a feedback for how we have reached that kind of understanding. The results of what we have been doing in Finn, okay, we should also say that this collects the department staff and practitioners in joint cooperative projects. We have our results in publications. I could send this presentation to someone, so the web links will be available for those who want them. But we have also a YouTube channel. So we put up films on YouTube because filming is the most effective way of describing how craft is doing, the whole do craft. So we have quite a number of films on this YouTube channel. And unfortunately for you, I would say that 95% of them are Swedish. But they are to an increasing degree. The last ones, actually, that it could be interesting for some of you. The last films are made in a setting of taking care of historical parks and gardens. And there's a dry wall in that are subject for being restored. So there's a number of films with English commentary and English texting, AI generated, but all the same, describing what is happening. So that could be something if you want to look at that. An example of this lab methodology could be this medieval church, this Sveneby old church from 12th century. Typical medieval church in the Swedish context. You could see it's kind of small Romanesque church. Very thick stone walls, double stone walls with filling in between. The big windows is a typical 18th century change of the original structure, which in this case caused severe problems because it was not good enough today. This church, as you can see, is situated on the Swedish west coast. When it was built, the shoreline was just some 20 meters from the church. Now the shoreline is 2.5, 3 kilometers from the church. So land race and so on has changed the context. The Swedish church decided that this church should be restored, and the problem here is the thick layers of plaster. It's really thick, and it's different layers. So all the plastic layers, the plaster should be taken away, and a new plaster should be put on the church. So we have a researcher at the department, Johnny Eriksson, he has 20 years experience as a mason, and he has taken his PhD, and this church was the case in his PhD. So he had a hypothesis about this church, that surface cracks from shrinking process increases with reworked lime putty compared with non-reworked lime putty. Okay, so what is reworked lime putty? That is what you buy from the shelf in the building material shop in sacks, 25 kilo, and you bring to the building site, mixed with water and sand. Non-reworked lime putty is what you produce on the building site. So his hypothesis was that if you produce your lime on the building site, without this storage time that actually takes place when you do it in industrial scale, you get a better result. And so you see here his test plates in the masonry in Mariestad, two series of reworked, respectively non-reworked, and you see the blue and yellow. So the top blue and yellow image is non-reworked lime putty, where you have the binding in small portions, creating voids and resulting in a very large surface which could bind water, which create a better process when the lime plaster starts to dry and shrink. You don't get that kind of cracks. But if you have a reworked lime putty, you have a tendency of the binding to be clogged together in bigger parts. You have a lesser, much lesser surface for the water to bind with, so you have much more water that creates larger cracks when the lime mortar, the lime plaster is drying. So this would be tested then on the wall of this church. So here's John Eriksson. All the plaster layer has been taken down. This is the original stone, and what you see is white there is actually the original medieval lime plaster that are still very intimately linked to the stone. So first is to start build a kiln, fill the kiln with local limestone, fire up the kiln for around 48 hours. So there was a workforce going in 4 shifts, seeing to that this is kept firing all the time. After some time, you could take down the lime kiln and take up the quick lime, smash it to smaller pieces, slake it, which was a very interesting process because it's a lot of power in this. And from the slaking, you could start put directly the lime plaster on the wall in the first layer, in the second layer, and in the third layer. And you can see they are working with brushes. And we could identify tracks of brushes on the original medieval lime plaster level. So that it's not only the lime plaster, but also the technique that goes back to medieval time. And this was the result eventually. John is standing there, quite proud of what he's been doing. But also, if you compare with the first image of the church, we have a portico, which was a window. But when we took down all the lime plasters, we saw that, okay, this is really a door and not a window. So we reconstructed the door, and you can see it's a ramp to provide better accessibility for wheelchairs. So 2 things that went good there. Going to the fact that we have been talking about the heritage profession and the need for education and how to interact between the professional practice and the education area, the European Union, through Erasmus, started a number of so-called blueprint projects. The intention with the blueprint project was that different sectors should develop what was called a sector skills strategy. And we started with tourism industry, the automotive industry, but also the heritage sector. So a big project, cultural heritage actions to refine training, education, and roles, action and charter, was started in January 2020, finalized in December 24, but yet really finalized in May 2025, with 47 partners across over Europe, with the intention to produce a skill strategy for the heritage sector that could guarantee that Europe had heritage skills that would support sustainable societies and economies. So that is interesting. If you want to see more of how one on European Union level or Council of Europe level thinks about heritage and the role of heritage, please Google their documents like the Heritage Strategy for the 21st Century from the Council of Europe, or the Work Plan for Culture 2023 to 2026 from the European Union, where one promotes heritage on a very, very broad scale. There's a lot of results from this project. I was part of the project. I was hired by ICOMOS office headquarters in Paris to represent them in this project. So there's a lot of results you find on that website, but one of the results was the identification of 8 innovative and emerging training pathways. And you can see that 2 of these pathways are more or less focusing on the need to train and educate in craft skills. But these pathways also varies from, on one hand, the local engagement, the local relevance, up to international relations and diplomacy. There's a lot of different needs for the heritage sector to actually be able to take this position in the society that is required of them. So, sustainability in built heritage and landscape, what does that imply? Well, it implies circular economy. So if we look at the construction sector, around 50% of extracted materials, up to 12% of greenhouse gases, over 35% of all waste. Europe has a relatively old building stock. Like 35% of the buildings are built before 1945. So much of the architectural practice are to an increasing degree focusing on the existing buildings. So if you look for something called Architects' Council of Europe, that brings together architectural associations from different countries, they have an observatory where they every year identifies what is happening in the architectural sector. So they say that around 59% of architectural practice is focused on renovation, existing buildings, rather than new constructions. Historic England made a study a couple of years ago where they have this, as you see in the image, traditional Victorian terrace. And they made a comparison, totally theoretical and hypothetical, but they tried to see, okay, what kind of impact will it have if we turn down this Victorian terrace and replaced it with new buildings, but with the same volume, same format? It would then produce 13 times more embedded carbon. So what society could save by renovate, as Historic England proposes, 50% of all pre-1990 residential buildings would reduce the carbon emission with 38.6 million tons by 2050, equivalent of more than 3 million flights between Heathrow and Dublin. So that is a kind of substantial effect on the climate. So in that respect, being able to do that requires craft skills, requires knowledge about historical materials, requires a lot of competencies that the construction sector today doesn't have. So my final slide is also a wink to Vasilis. I remember you said about the Japanese. I was in Osaka in 2017, visiting the Osaka Castle. And you find this there. Yeah. I'm standing beside it, and I'm like 6 feet or 180. So it's pretty high, pretty big stones. And look at how they are fit together. And one wonders, how did they do that? I mean, and this is built 1583 to 97. So, some 400 years ago, they were able to do this with this precision. And that is what they lost.
Yeah.
So that is why they come here, to learn this again. And that is something to build on, I think.
Uh-huh.
Okay, thank you.